This is the Glaive Prime, probably the best melee weapon in Warframe and a fan favorite since pretty much forever. Only problem is, it also hasn't been available in the game since forever, leading to some, let's call it, spicy pricing on Warframe.market. But no more, because the Glaive Prime has finally returned with TennoCon 2024. So, in today's Warframe guide, I'm gonna tell you everything you need to know about the Glaive Prime, why it is so busted, why everybody loves it, how to mod it to get the big red numbers out of it, and why you definitely shouldn't miss out on this opportunity. Big shoutouts to all generous channel members who helped me keep the lights on, and now, let's jump right into it. Now, first of all, what even is the Glaive Prime, how does it work, and why is it so special? Let's talk about the mechanics. The Glaive Prime is a melee weapon, and it is one example of the very few thrown melee weapons in the game. What that means is that, yes, like other melee weapons, the Glaive Prime also can do a normal combo, but that's probably not what you want to do, because the most power of this thing is being unleashed when you throw it at enemies and make it explode mid-air, dealing big AoE damage. In order to throw the glaive, you need to perform a heavy attack, and then either it bounces between enemies, or you can press the alt fire or the heavy attack button while the glaive is mid-air to make it detonate prematurely and come back to you immediately, unleashing a big AoE explosion, and this is the special thing about the Glaive Prime, it force procs a big, heavy slash on all the affected enemies of that explosion. This is something exclusive to the Glaive Prime, and that's also the reason why we all love it so much. But that's of course not all, because there's another special thing about thrown melees in Warframe, and that is that you can use your secondary weapon while you have that melee weapon out. So just like you also see in the background, you can shoot your secondary weapon and then wildly throw the glaive at the same time without having to swap weapons. This is especially useful if you, for example, use a secondary weapon as a status primer, to inflict maybe cold, maybe viral, two great status effects, and with a thrown melee, like the Glaive Prime, you don't have to switch back and forth between the weapons, which is kind of finicky and many players don't like it. No, with thrown melees, you can prime the enemy with the secondary and throw the melee at the same time. My personal recommendation here would be the Epitaph, because it force procs cold, which makes enemies more susceptible to your crit damage and also freezes them, and then in addition to that, mod viral onto it to make them even weaker to all your damage. They're just gonna explode in a split second. And just by the way, if you could maybe spare a like for the video, that would make me super happy, because it helps big time with the YouTube algorithm. Cheers so much for your support, and now let's take a look at the builds. Now, when it comes to modding your Glaive Prime, then there is a lot to pay attention to, because glaives are very much different from your standard day-to-day melee weapon. So let's go over it step by step. As with any melee weapon, the first question is, which stance mod should you use? This one is usually quite the debate, but for thrown melees, it's pretty straightforward. Since you're not going to use the normal attack combo most of the time anyway, it really doesn't matter. Just use whatever you have, and that should do the job just fine. Next, for the Glaive Prime, you won't need a melee Excellence adapter, because for thrown melee in general, we don't need Tennokai mods. The reason for that is that while Tennokai attacks are super cool, in order to trigger the opportunity to do one, you would have to do normal attacks, and that is something we don't do with the Glaive anyway, so we're not even going to be able to do Tennokai, meaning we can save on the adapter and don't use any Tennokai mods. The next thing that is also massively different to other melee weapons is we don't go for range. Don't use reach, don't use primed reach or any other mods that increase your weapon's range, because the explosion radius when you make the glaive projectile detonate is not affected by those mods, rendering them completely useless. But now, with all of that out of the way, how do we actually want to mod that thing? First off, base damage and crit chance is going to be done with the sacrificial mods. Don't use prime pressure point, and also don't use condition overload, because condition overload doesn't trigger on the explosion from the projectile, and we're also not going to build up combo, which means we get more crit chance from sacrificial steel, which is the reason why the base damage mod should be sacrificial pressure and not primed pressure point. By the way, the crit bonus from Sacrificial Steel is doubled because the throws of the glaive count as heavy attack, meaning we're gonna get quite the good crit chance out of this anyway. Then crit damage with Gladiator Might, and, this is very important, Amalgam Organ Shatter, not normal Organ Shatter, because Amalgam Organ Shatter gives you more heavy attack wind-up speed, which is exactly what we need because the glaive throws are heavy attacks, so you can do that faster. That's, by the way, also why we use Killing Blow to further increase the damage from those heavy attacks. And because of the fact that we're force proccing Slash, we naturally want to go with a faction damage bonus because these scale quadratically with damage over time effects, meaning you would throw a lot of potential damage out the window if you don't use one of them. Next, another very essential mod for this setup would be Volatile Quick Return. This one does quite a lot, but most of this doesn't really matter. The only important thing here is that this is the one mod out of all the range mods that can actually increase the blast radius when the glaive's projectile explodes, meaning more AoE, so this one is a definite must. And as the final mod, and this is a pretty recent addition, we go for Melee Elementalist because this one makes this already super busted glaive build even crazier. I mean, I've already made a video on how slash damage over time effects are super duper stronger with the new Elementalist mods, but especially for the Glaive Prime, this is a match made in heaven. Melee Elementalist increases the damage that you deal from status effect, meaning the bleed damage over time from slashes. This bonus is multiplicative to all the other damage bonus types, meaning your overall damage output is going to be much higher, and as a nice cherry on top, you also get even more heavy attack speed. Now, let's finally also talk about melee arcanes because there is quite a lot to cover right here. Many of the arcanes that we usually like melee animosity that gives you more crit chance for heavy attacks, right? This sounds great, but it actually isn't because you need to stack it up by doing normal attacks, which, remember, we're not going to do, so that's a no-no. Melee Crescendo could potentially work if you were to stay in the mission for long and you want to modify your build in a way that you actually go for combo and get your crit chance this way, but I personally wouldn't recommend it, it's a bit finicky. Melee Duplicate, however, is really nice if you purposely build the glaive on lower crit chance so that you can only do yellow crits. Then with Melee Duplicate, these crits will hit twice, meaning they deal much more damage, so if you have Melee Duplicate, this is an option. Melee Fortification can be a good defensive tool if your Warframe needs it, and if you have a Warframe with a lot of shields, then Melee Retaliation is going to give you so much more base damage that I can only really recommend it. This would be my 2 cents on the whole arcane situation, but feel free to tell me which arcanes you prefer on the Glaive Prime in the comments down below. This right here would be the full standard build for the Glaive Prime. This right here would be the build variant if you only want to go for yellow crits and then the melee duplicate thing that I talked about earlier. And this right here would be a budget option that also has quite the punch for your Glaive Prime. If all of that sounds good to you, then you might be wondering, well, where do I actually get the darn thing from? So let's also take a look at that right now. The Glaive Prime is part of the Ember Prime Access, which is currently available in the game for around 90 days at the point of making this video, which means there are 2 main ways to get it. If you wanted to, you could go to the market and buy Regal Aya for real money, and then simply purchase the Glaive Prime for 2 Regal Aya and get it directly. Alternatively, you're looking for specific Void Relics which contain the parts to construct the Glaive Prime, which are those 3 that you're seeing in the background right now, and you can either farm them in the game, purchase them from normal Aya, or, and this is one big tip if you haven't already, go to your syndicates and purchase random relic packs, because there is quite the chance that you're either going to get some of those relics directly, or actually Aya, which you can then turn into one of the relics of your choice. Oh yeah, and of course, if you actually wanted to buy the thing from other players for Platinum, then now that it's unvaulted, the prices on Warframe.market should have taken quite the nosedive, so in that case I would say wait 1 or 2 more weeks and then strike your deal. But don't click away just yet, video ain't over. Before we wrap it up for today, I want to give you some loadout suggestions that synergize super duper well with the Glaive Prime so you can get the absolute most out of it once you have it. First off, any Warframe out there naturally that can buff up melee weapons is going to be a match made in heaven with the Glaive Prime. First and foremost, of course, Kalervo, because he gives you the big red crits that deal all the nice numbers that you also saw in the intro. By the way, you can also take this skill Wrathful Advance via the Helmet skill and put it onto any other Warframe you like, so you don't have to necessarily play Kalervo himself. But if, as a helmet option, you don't want to go for Wrathful Advance, then some other great suggestions, for example, would be Roar, because the buff from Roar counts as faction damage bonus, meaning you don't necessarily have to mod it onto the glaive, and if you have modded onto the glaive, then the effect and the double dipping is going to be even crazier, so much more damage for you. And then when we're talking about companions, I personally have a clear favorite here, and that would be Nautilus, because with the mod Cordon, Nautilus can group up enemies neatly together in front of you, so they're all nicely in one spot, and you can throw the glaive in there, make it explode, and everything is going to be dead instantly. My personal recommendation here, if you were to go for Nautilus, would be that you also put Manifold Bond onto Nautilus, because it reduces the cooldown of the grouping skill every time you kill an enemy with at least 3 status effects applied to them. As we said, this is pretty easy because you can use your secondary weapon together with the glaive and do the status priming, meaning pretty much everything you kill will have more than 3 status effects on them already. Therefore, your Nautilus is going to constantly spam the grouping, and as you also see in the background right here, it is really crazy. It's super duper strong, super fun, and you can take this into endurance runs, you can take this into Elite Archimedia. The Glaive Prime is not only one of the best melee weapons in the game, but has become even stronger with melee arcanes and the addition of Elementalist mods. And speaking of TennoCon 2024, it was last weekend, I was there in person, and there's a lot to talk about, which I will do here on this channel right after uploading this video. So if you don't want to miss out on all the TennoCon details and discussions here day one, then you might want to consider maybe leaving the channel a sub. Welcome to the crew. Another big shout out to Needles V, Demon Lord Cell, Demon Emperor, Emperor Prime, Nostalnix Gaming, Lycan Shepherd, Turtlepeer, Pepperwolf, Ondakani02, Streamjet21, SignUpKing 5000, GriblipEXE, Mihawk AG, Yagis, and all other generous channel members for your continuous support. We see each other, hopefully in the next one, and until then, as always, good loot!